Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Learning at Lunch. I'm Ann Kinseth. I'm the Director of Education at the Meadows Museum, and we're so happy that you've decided to join us during your lunch hour. So a few notes before we get started. I'd like to request that everyone keep their microphone on mute throughout the talk this afternoon. We will also be holding questions until the end. But throughout the presentation, you are welcome to use the chat box to share your questions. And at the end, I will either share them with our presenter today, or I would be happy to let you unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. And finally, I do want to let you know that we are recording this talk with the hopes that it will be added to the Meadows Museum YouTube channel in the future. So it is my pleasure to introduce Akemi Louisa Harrieth-Vosprink. She is the current Center for Spain and America Curatorial Fellow here at the Meadows Museum. Previously, she was the 2018-2020 Centro de Estudios Europas Hispánicas Spanish Painting Curatorial Fellow at the National Gallery in London. And she was also a graduate intern at the Getty Museum's Paintings Department. Her doctoral research at the University of Cambridge focuses on 17th century Spanish paintings, specifically Francisco de Zurbarán and his reception in Latin America. She holds a degree in art history from Cambridge University, and research for her master's degree at Edinburgh University focused on cross-border encounters in Spanish Orientalism and Islamic art. And we are thrilled to have her with us today for a talk that she has titled A Spanish Artist Active in Mexico. Welcome, Akemi.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure to speak to all of you and see many familiar faces, including my parents I can see there, and my boyfriend and other friends and colleagues from the Meadows Museum. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk about this artist called Alonso Lopez de Herrera. That is represented at the Meadows Museum collection and has been of great interest to me, especially because it's one of the hidden gems, and unfortunately it's not currently on display, but it's often on display and has traveled to several exhibitions around the United States and Mexico. Today, I must say that I'm especially interested in this copper in particular because I have worked on the Spanish artist Francisco de Zurbarán and looking at how he exported his canvases to the Americas. But today I'm not looking at materials going to the Americas, but an artist, a Spanish artist, Alonso Lopez de Herrera, moving to the Americas and developing most of his known career over there. And what is interesting is that his career was really shaped in Mexico because that's where he was first commissioned to portray the Mexican archbishop. And then he had several commissions, mostly featuring the Dominican order. Before discussing the Meadows copper, though, I would like to provide a brief overview of the artist's biography. It is believed that Alonso Lopez de Herrera was born in Valladolid, Spain, circa 1580. As he signed several paintings as Vallesolertamis, meaning from Valladolid, and his birthplace is indicated in a book of professions at the convent of Santo Domingo in Mexico City. He was also nicknamed the Divine or Divino Herrera, enhancing his technical prowess and preference for religious subjects. He follows evidence Mannerist Italian and early 17th century Flemish models, which he could have seen in Spain and in Mexico. He moved to New Spain in 1609, although earlier chroniclers thought that he was born in Mexico. His earliest work produced in Mexico is a portrait of Fray Garcia Guerra, Archbishop of Mexico City, followed by his subsequent appointment as Viceroy from 1611 to 1612. Some biographers believe that López de Herrera traveled to Mexico with the archbishop in 1608. He may have also moved to Mexico for other religious or economic reasons, led by the oversaturation of the local market. Other Spanish artists before him, such as Andrés de la Concha, Baltasar de Chaveorío, and Alonso Vázquez, similarly moved to Spain. The prior two were even eulogized for their painterly skills, and Bernardo de Balbuena's epistolary poem Grandeza Mexicana from 1604, which celebrates and describes the splendors of Mexico City. Meanwhile, Vázquez's work was often confused with Alonso Lopez de Herrera's paintings for the common use of the long, elongated Mannerist figures. Herrera took orders with the Dominican since 1625, and therefore often appears cited as Fray Alonso Lopez de Herrera. He resided in the Dominican houses of Puebla, Guadalajara, and Zacatecas, where he was in 1646 and where he probably passed away sometime after this date. About 30 works by him survive, and of these, 2/3 are on panel, whereas the remaining ones are on copper and canvas. Of those that are on panel, 2 at the Museo Nacional de Arte in Mexico City are of considerable dimensions and represent López de Herrera's Assumption of the Virgin and the Resurrection of Christ, which, according to Manuel Romero de Terreros, could have originated from the altarpiece of the Church of Santo Domingo in Mexico City. The magnitude of Christ and the Virgin is emphasized by the towering figures over the crowds represented half-length in the lower half. Using copper as a support was already common in the Spanish viceroyalties since the 16th century. In Mexico, for example, a unique local tradition developed combining European and pre-Columbian techniques by creating featherwork images on copper supports, attaining the rigidity needed for their successful display, and adding to the shimmering nature of their iridescent feathers, often of hummingbirds and other colorful birds. Here, unfortunately, the colors have worn out with time, but imagine this really popping out with those intense blues and greens and reds that you see there of all kinds of tropical birds. Meanwhile, the popularity of the copper plate is mostly due to the arrival of Flemish paintings on copper and also some Italian paintings on copper to Spain and the Americas. Here, for example, we see 2 works on copper by Flemish artist Juan van der Hamen y Leon, who painted in Philip IV's court and was well known for his still lifes, as indicated by the floral garlands surrounding the religious scenes. Other artists, such as Baltasar de Chaveorío, son of the previously mentioned Baltasar de Chaveorío, were major exponents of paintings on copper in Mexico during the first half of the 17th century. Echave closely followed Flemish models, especially for his landscapes, and was known for his abundant use of bluish tonalities. He was therefore nicknamed the Echave of the blue tones. All of these types of coppers, including those covered in featherwork made in Europe or in Mexico, including what we can see here in the middle of this chapel, of this wall in this chapel in the Cathedral of Puebla, the Capilla de Ochavo, referring to its octagonal shape, has in the middle actually 1 copper plate by López de Herrera of the Holy Face, as well as this incredible number of coppers from Europe and Mexico and feather paintings. This is actually considered one of the earliest art collections conserved in its original location in the Americas. The Meadows Museum copper, alongside another double-sided copper attributed to López de Herrera at the Bello Museum in Puebla, are unique in having been painted on both sides. To create the copper plates, these were first hammered or rolled into thin sheets. They were then polished on both sides, as you don't see the hammer marks you normally see present on the backs of coppers that are just painted on one side, no, because they didn't need to polish the back, as this wouldn't have been visible. The smoothing process consisted on rubbing the plate with a pumice abrasive, although sometimes this was left a bit rough or even treated with garlic juice, as you can see in this image here in the lower right corner, to improve the paint adhesion. And this was actually recommended by the Spanish artist Antonio Palomino, writing in around 1715 to 1724. So if you're afraid of vampires, you can collect some of these these painted coppers, as many of them have a garlic base. Also, another Spanish 17th century artist, Francisco Pacheco, in his treatise Arte de la Pintura, suggested that the plate should only be primed with a thin layer of white lead and umber in oil, which is spread with the fingers and not the brush. Then the desired composition was painted with a thin brush over this primed layer. Copper deposits were abundantly found in Spain and the Americas, and it was a popular medium exported to the Americas due to its lightness, durability, and small format. Such was the popularity of copper that it was used as a surface well into the 18th and 19th century by artists such as Goya, and even for the popular ex votos. There are also paintings on reused engraved coppers, of which there are several examples in the Viceroyalty of New Spain and Peru. López de Herrera painted a Virgin of the Immaculate Conception on a copper on which the reverse was engraved with 55 images of saints and theological symbols, which have been related to the Herráez family of Flemish printmakers. Prints produced off this copper probably served as tools for Christian education for several religious orders. Returning to the Meadows Museum copper, it features St. Francis and St. Thomas of Aquinas and is signed on both sides. Where St. Francis was canonized in 1228 and lived a pious pauper life, St. Thomas of Aquinas was canonized about a century later in 1323 and lived and joined the Dominican order circa 1344 and was known for his theological writings, specifically his Summa Theologica, which was used during the Council of Trent to explain the church's doctrine. There's a marked contrast of this pious versus erudite lifestyle, enhanced with the divergent clothing, with St. Francis's robes stitched with patches, whereas, and as you can see some torn parts, whereas St. Thomas's pristine robe covered with golden chains and the sun over his chest is quite a remarkable contrast. The chains might have been represented in allusion with one of St. Thomas's of Aquinas's works titled The Golden Chain. Contrastingly, carnal mortification is enhanced by St. Francis's evident stigmata wounds on his hands, feet, and chest, emulating those of Christ, which were imprinted during prayer by the six-winged crucified seraph seen in the upper left corner. Witnessing this event in the background is Brother Leo, who was St. Francis's confessor and companion. St. Francis was also placed in the wilderness in La Verna, where he retreated to pray for 40 days, where St. Thomas is in his office, ready to write with his quill pen while receiving celestial illumination of the Holy Spirit, symbolized by the dove descending from the heavenly aperture. The results of some of these writings are represented in the bookcase in the background. The Franciscan and Dominican orders were equally two of the most powerful orders in the Americas and established some of the oldest religious foundations over there. López Herrera probably referred to printed sources, but unfortunately these had not been identified. He was especially meticulous in his technique, using fine brushes and small format compositions like these. Certain details such as the stitching, gilded studs of the chair, the titles of the books, and even the eyelashes are especially remarkable. He is also well-versed in perspective, as we can see with St. Thomas's foreshortened hand. His meticulously rendered elongated hands and the half-open mouth is seen with St. Francis are typical traits in his portraits. López Herrera is also identifiable for his use of strong, vibrant colors, which are enhanced by the shimmering nature of the copper plates. The Meadows copper was initially held in a private collection in England and was later sold at the Park Burnett Galleries in New York in 1979 or 1980. And from there, it went to the art dealer, Alex Wengraft in London, and from which it was acquired by the Meadows Museum in 1988. Unfortunately, no early provenance of this work is known, but if anyone knows of any information, I would be more than happy to hear it. There is another double-sided copper signed by López de Herrera at the Museo Bello y Cetina in Puebla with St. Augustine and St. Dominic. Apparently, part of the date is inscribed as 1620 something. We don't know what the final digit is. It may have served as a model for the Meadows paintings. It is similarly a pair of a saint in a study versus one out in the wilderness. And what is interesting is that there is also similar green tablecloth and chair with golden studs. We see in St. Augustine's study and a window open to a landscape. St. Augustine holds his quill and he's graced with the divine inspiration and wears an elaborate bishop mitre and cope. Typical attributes of the saint include the arrow piercing his heart, symbolic of the love he had for the Creator, and the background scene of the boy holding a shell who taught St. Augustine a lesson by telling him that he would empty the sea in a hole before St. Augustine understood the mystery of the Holy Trinity. On the other side is St. Dominic, who gazes upwards wearing the Dominican black and white tunic holding lilies and a cross. He's accompanied in the lower left corner, sorry that he's not very visible because of the varnish, yellowed varnish, is a dog with a flaming torch, alluding to the dream the saint's mother had when giving birth to him, that he would illuminate the world with his light. Both works may have formed part of a freestanding altarpiece where the saints faced each other and would have been visible on both sides. Although I think it is more likely that they were used as stores of a tabernacle holding liturgical objects such as the chalice for the Eucharist, the communion wafers, or a reliquary cabinet. The sides of the two Dominican saints are more damaged as they probably were more exposed, being on the outward facing part of the door. Perhaps because they were in a Dominican foundation, so they wanted to enhance the importance of the Dominican saints. For example, the St. Thomas of Aquinas, when it was acquired by the Meadows Museum, had more pinpoint losses across the surface, especially on the face and several areas to the right of the center. The presence of as I said, again, I think the presence of the two Dominican saints suggests that it was made for a chapel, or I mean, a church, a convent of this order. There's actually another version of the same Thomas of Aquinas in copper. Sorry for the poor quality black and white image, but if you know of another image, I'm more than happy to receive it. That was previously recorded in the collection of Manuel Romero de Terreros, who wrote a monograph on the artist in 1934 and is said to remain in the family collection. There are small variations, such as the presence of 4 books with different titles, a smaller window, a differently rendered dove, which is quite faintly seen here. The hands are in other positions, but just so slightly. Actually, they're pretty much the same. And you will see that the inkwell is pushed into the lower left corner. According to Romero de Terreros, it is painted on a copper, which reverse is engraved with bust-length figures of wives of Roman emperors, although unfortunately no image is available. This again demonstrates Herrera's resourcefulness, as this is the second case where he uses an engraved copper plate. Other works by or attributed to the artist in the United States, apart from the Meadows Museum paintings and the previously mentioned Immaculate Conception copper at the Hispanic Society, include 2 works at the Denver Art Museum and the San Antonio Museum of Art in Texas. The prior is a painting of St. Anthony and the Christ Child in copper. It features attributes mentioned in the previous coppers, such as the opening sky with radiating rays surrounding the peering Christ Child, and the subtle details of the perfectly rendered hands. Another painting attributed to the artist of the Miracle of St. Nicholas of Tolentino at the San Antonio Museum of Art is most likely by a follower, as some passages are less refined, especially in the facial expressions, and part of the paint ground layer is visible through the habits and background. Other elements, though, such as the delicately rendered hands and the sun on the habit, as seen as the St. Thomas of Aquinas, suggest a link to the artist. One of the most interesting details is the partridge, which relates to one of the saint's miracles, during which he refused to eat cooked partridges when he was unwell. When he made the sign of the cross with his hand, the partridges revived and flew away. Here is a story for those that thought that being vegetarian is a recent phenomenon. Now let's go to a darker image, from the partridge to these very melancholic faces of Christ, these holy faces, which López Herrera painted about half a dozen, which may have served as tabernacle doors, as was the function of one of such paintings dated to 1634 for the altar of El Perdón in Mexico City's cathedral, which was destroyed in a fire in 1967. In this case, we see from the Museo de América, we can see a very elaborate signature. You remember at the beginning, I mentioned that sometimes he signed that he was from Valladolid. In Latin, well, we have this here. After his name, we have the Latin origin of Valladolid, no, in the signature. What is interesting, though, is how he renders this very poignant iconography, no? And he emphasizes his signature, almost turning this copper into the relic of the Veronica. We can see these bloodshot eyes, these very prominent red streaming blood from the crown of thorns, and some of the thorns even pierce the skin. It is a very graphic representation, and there are several of this type. And he probably followed a print, probably a Flemish print, as a motto. Another work of incredible detail is his Annunciation at the Museo de America, dated to circa 1630. It is yet another scene of great detail in passages such as the rug and the opening clouds with the Holy Spirit, and also the Lord. And underneath you have Gabriel coming to announce for the Annunciation. And what is incredible are the strong light effects, and we can see the vibrancy of the Virgin's robe, enhanced with these white colors. There are also other signed works by the artists. For example, Saint Dominic in Soriano and the Church of Santo Domingo in Mexico City, as well as the Church of Santo Domingo in Puebla, Zacatecas, and a now destroyed work which was previously in Tepoztlán. So you can see there's still quite a corpus of paintings, but as we saw with the San Antonio painting previously, some are of doubtful attribution. So this is a growing process, but what is so exciting about Alonso Lopez Herrera is that he signed many of his works. So he was wanting to really establish himself in the Mexican milieu and also as this friar artist, active within the religious orders, especially the Dominican order, and placing some of his paintings in prominent places such as Mexico City's cathedral. So I would just like to end by saying that this artist really shows an incredible technique in copper, in panel, in canvas, and I really think he deserves the nickname of El Divino, or the Divine. And now, please let me know if you have any questions. I will be more than happy to answer them. And yes, greetings from both St. Thomas of Aquinas and St. Francis.
Akemi, thank you so much. We actually already do have some questions in the chat box, but as a reminder for everyone here, you are welcome to add questions into the chat box, or you can certainly write that you would like to unmute yourself, and I'll let you know when that can happen, and you can ask your question directly. So let's start with the ones that we already have. So I think talking about the Meadows Museum work, Stephanie is wondering if El Greco served as an influence at all.
No, that's a very good point. I think, well, obviously El Greco also painted on copper. So thank you very much, Wendy, for pointing that out. And there's also that kind of ghostly whitish elongated figures, And I mean, we unfortunately don't know much about Alonso Lopez Herrera's career in Spain before moving to Mexico. As far as I know, there are no attributed works from his Spanish phase. He was from Valladolid, but I'm sure he traveled around Spain. Some people say that maybe he went to Seville, and he might have gone to Toledo equally. So he might have seen El Greco's work, and you can see it as well in these Mannerist elongated figures where there's that very prominent influence. There's this mixture of Flemish and Italian styles coming together. But thank you so much, Wendy, for your questions.
Thanks. We have two more in the chat box that we'll get to, and then I will invite Adam Jasinski to unmute. So back to the chat box. Could you talk a little bit about the suns on St. Thomas's robe and the chains? So Lourdes is wondering if the chain and the sun is part of the Dominican habit.
Yes, I think the chains especially are, as I mentioned, more related to St. Thomas of Aquinas specifically because of his writings. One of them is titled The Golden Chains, So, or it relates to the golden chains. faith. So there's this relation here. And then the sun actually is not only there, but we also see it with St. Nicholas of Tolentino. So it kind of emphasizes this heavenly celestial. Here the celestial part is even taken further with like the stars on the robe, but he's actually from the Augustinian order. So I don't think it's specifically from the Dominicans. There are several orders that incorporated this, no? But yes, thank you for that interesting question.
Okay, great. So copper, we have a question about copper. So how would an artist learn to paint on copper, and why was copper used as a substrate?
Yes, so I think there were certain traditions, especially in the Netherlands, where this was pushed further. Copper was a medium that allowed this shimmering nature, no, with the reflective nature. And also, as I mentioned previously, it's great in terms of portability. It can also have a more private nature, because I showed the chapel of Ochavo, no, in Puebla, but many of these coppers were kept in private settings, no? And many of them were also of secular nature, which is important to remember. Like the Flemish coppers quite often were of landscapes. And these were shipped to Spain and then the Americas, and they were quite light. They didn't corrode as much, and they were quite portable. So they were sought for actually in Europe and in the Americas because of all these positive aspects, no? And it is true that in a way, no, it's interesting, in the 17th century, there was more of a reuse of these coppers, no? Implying, even though there were prominent copper mines, and for example, in the Andes, the interest was more in the silver mines, for example, in Potosí, than the copper. So it's interesting how there were priorities in these senses. But of course, we have to remember that there were also printing presses in the Americas. And these coppers were also produced locally for their own printing presses. So there was also this production on both sides of the Atlantic, no?
Thank you. So I'm going to now invite Adam Jasinski to unmute for a question.
Thank you.
Hi, Akemi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Adam.
Thanks so much for the wonderful talk. I hope you can hear me okay, because my internet's been going in and out all morning.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
This wonderful version that you showed from the Manuel Romero de Terreros
yes.
collection. Do you think that tells us something about López de Herrera's workshop? Do you think he was in charge or maintained a large workshop? Do you suspect that this was one of, say, dozens of copies of this popular composition that he might have made? I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you, Adam. No, he is certainly a fascinating artist, and there's so many of these that are in private collections or lost that we don't know about, and it would be great to trace them, because there's only a handful of artworks, and mostly those that are signed are the ones that are firmly attributed to him, because, as I said, we're lucky to have so many works signed by him. But I think he definitely would have had a workshop or followers or circle in Mexico, given his prominent status there, is portraying the Archbishop, and also with completing many commissions for the Dominican order. And I think certainly this could be, I put it as Alonso Lopez de Herrera, but perhaps it could have been the workshop or a follower. It's difficult to tell with this black and white image. And definitely, as I mentioned, like this case in San Antonio, I don't think it's by him himself, but probably by a follower or the circle. As you can see, there are different levels of qualities, but some features, such as the hands, for example, and the gestures, are definitely pointing towards him, no? And then the other one that was done at infinitum, and there's several versions, is the Holy Face, of which there probably are more versions out there, no? And some of them are more detailed than others. Some of them have the crown of thorns. Some of them have just the face of Christ without the blood or the crown. So there are all these variations, and they're quite subtle. So I think, as you mentioned, he kind of profited from this replicas, no, replicating them in a way in different formats. But also this copper medium would have also been quite profitable because it's a small format. So you could have them produced at quite a large number, no? So I think that is quite interesting, no? And how he kind of is also leaving his mark in all of these Dominican convents across Mexico, and perhaps his workshop also helped to establish and prolong this reputation, no? And perhaps also his workshop also intervened more actively in bigger panels or canvases, where obviously there's more of an incentive of collaborating because of the large dimensions, whereas the coppers, he may have done them more on his own accord, no, because they're easier in terms of their smaller format. But thank you, Adam.
Thanks. Okay, Akemi, would you be able to talk about the pigments that he used? Was he painting with locally sourced pigments, or were things imported from Europe?
No, that's a very good question. I haven't looked at, I don't know if there is technical analysis. As far as I know, for the one at the Meadows Museum, there hasn't been a pigment analysis. So I cannot guarantee exactly what pigments he used. I imagine, though, there were some pigments like the cochineal red that were sourced locally. There was also the palo de Campeche, which is this black pigment that was often used in Spanish paintings, and also for dyes that I imagine he would have sourced locally, because this was produced especially in Yucatan. But of course, there would have been other kind of mineral sources that came from Europe. And there is evidence of pigments being imported from Europe, as, for example, Francisco de Zurbarán, the artist I'm working on for my doctoral thesis, was said to send painting materials, brushes and pigments, alongside his paintings in one of the shipments he sent to Buenos Aires in the 1640s. So again, I think there most definitely would have been a mixture of pigments used in these paintings. But thank you for the question.
Thanks. We have another question, I think, that is about scholarship on the artist. Can you talk about who you feel is perhaps the most, produced the most influential, study on the painter?
Yes, I think Marcus Berg is a person to look to. He was basically here when the copper was acquired. He's at the Hispanic Society of America, and he has done the most extensive and up-to-date research on the artist. Before him, there's some Mexican authors like Xavier Maussan, or I have the publication here. This is the autobiography that I mentioned by Manuel Romero de Terreros. Unfortunately, this is from 1934. So obviously there have been discoveries since then, determining because his Spanish origin, because it was thought that he was Mexican before. And then there is also the fact that many things were outdated there. Another good source to look at, not specifically on Alonso Lopez Herrera, is this incredible catalog. It's actually quite old. It's already from 1999. That is titled Copper is Canvas. And it was an exhibition at the Phoenix Art Museum and Nelson Atkins Museum and the Mauritshuis. And it's a great catalog because it not only encompasses European coppers, but also colonial Latin American ones. And this for me is very exciting because it also includes a lot of technical work on these coppers. And I pulled some of the information on the technical aspect of making these copper plates from this great catalog.
Thanks, Akemi. I think we have two more questions, and I think we have enough time to get to them. So We have someone who's interested in the miracle of St. Nicholas of Tolentino.
Nice.
Yeah, and is
Sorry.
particularly interested in the oranges.
Yeah.
And also if, let's see, if depicting a saint with that kind of robe is kind of standard. They note that it looks perhaps to our eyes like a magician's robe. I don't know if you could talk at all about some of the symbols that we see in this work.
Yes, no, it's interesting. Like the open orange, I mean, is quite interesting because I don't know about the religious significance as much, because other fruits like pomegranate have definite allusions to the Eucharist, blood of Christ. But the orange might also symbolize like the oranges of Spain and the commerce and how they circulated, no? And also the citrus fruits and how these were crossed, also the Atlantic, no? Because and then you have the robe, as you mentioned. As I said, mentioned briefly before, the sun again in the celestial kind of cape with the stars have this heavenly aspect, and this is emphasized by the opening, in the sky with the Holy Spirit. So again, it shows this divine inspiration in this moment of the miracle, no? That it's like God intervened, and that's why the partridge revived. So I think it's more related to this rather than his Augustinian order specifically, because it's not a standard throughout this kind of habit. And I think also López Herrera loves adding these small details. If it's stitches, if it's stars, it's just to bring your eye close to the composition. And this is a very small oil panel, so he would have used like one or two hair brushes, like very fine brushes, to create these details actually.
Thank you. And I think we'll end with this question, which is about his nickname as El Divino. Would you be able to talk about that at all?
Yes, no, it's interesting because it's mentioned in several convent documents in Mexico City, in the convent of Santo Domingo. And what is interesting is that before him, there's Luis de Morales artist. He's a 16th century Spanish artist known for his kind of tenebrous compositions, also a bit mannerist, as we see with López Herrera, and he was also nicknamed the Divine, no? So it's kind of this nickname given to artists that were actively painting for the religious orders or had this prominence of religious subjects, no? That we see with Alonso Lopez Herrera or with Morales, no? So it is not a unique thing, as I mentioned, but it also gives him a certain status in Mexico, which is important, no, amongst his contemporaries. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Akemi. This has been wonderful. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We really hope to see you at future digital and hopefully in the fall, some in-person programming at the Meadows Museum. So thank you all for joining us and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely seeing you. Bye. Take care. Bye, Mom and Dad. Thank you.